And welcome everyone to another exciting adventure on the energy that surrounds us. I'm your host, Michael. And tonight's guest, I also want to say real quick, thank you for joining us at this early time. I know it's a little bit earlier than normal, so thank you everyone who's already tuning in and watching. And tonight's guest, I am so excited to have on because she covers so many different topics in a unique way that we've kind of hinted on, we haven't hinted on. And so tonight, you guys are in for a great adventure. So I cannot even begin to cover everything in her bio. So I'm going to allow my guest to introduce herself. So I give you the one, the only, writer extraordinaire, Cheryl Costa.
Hi, Mike. How you doing?
I'm
Okay,
good. How are you?
very good. For your audience, okay, if my voice seems a little on the resonant side, I'm a trans person, okay? But it's nothing new. It happened 37 years ago. So for those of you who believe this transgender stuff just happened last 5 or 10 years, no, 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 no. It happened a long time ago. It's been around. We've been here forever, okay? All right. My background. Okay, I'm a two-service military veteran. I had a 30-year career in D.C. working for the government. What else do we say here? I've written 52 books on UFOs, and I've got a couple of novels out. And I used to run a newspaper column for 7 years every week, writing a 800-word term paper every Thursday for a newspaper about UFOs. So I'm very dipped in the UFO topic matter, and I can answer some of your questions. Don't ask me about obscure sightings, but I can talk in general things. And it's been very exciting since they started releasing stuff. Really cool stuff is going down.
And I like how you point out, that some of this, has been around, and I cannot imagine writing so many books. I mean, I've put out five, and I got three in the works, and I'm like, man, I can't hold a candle to a lot of you saying, I got 50, I got 100 books out. I'm like, how?
Let me
And
explain that. Let me explain that. I'm a UFO statistician. Okay, now when I wrote my column, I wrote stories. Okay, but I got very good with UFO statistics because I was an analyst in the government service. I did analyst work, intelligence analyst kind of work. Okay, so I was really good with numbers. So I started trying to do what nobody else had ever done: add up the numbers. And there's two UFO statisticians in the country, and I'm married to the other one. Okay, so it makes for an interesting thing. We're a cottage publishing firm, so we publish all our own stuff, um, and that's the deal. Okay, we've got one big master book called the UFO Settings Desk Reference. There's two of them, a white one that was 2001 to 2015, and then the pink book is 2001 to 2020. Okay, I wrote that during 2020 when we were all dressed up with no place to go, lockdown. Um, and people ask, I'm going to say this, why is the book pink? Nobody knew COVID was coming. In 2019, some of the guys in DC who are lobbyists down there, and we call them the usual suspects, uh, they called me up on the phone and said, look, Senator Rubio is putting a bill in place that next year they're going to try and have congressional hearings. Okay, you girls have written the only books of statistics. Would you be willing to testify before Congress? And Linda and I looked at each other and said, wait a minute. We spent our whole careers trying not to have to testify before Congress. So we did we said, okay, fine. But after we got off the phone call with them, Linda and I talked about it. Says, hey, we've seen these things. We've been at congressional hearings. We've watched how they do it. We've seen them on C-SPAN. They got all these congressmen or senators up there at that big desk, and they got books in front of them, and people handing them notes and things, you know. And all those books usually are white covers. You don't see what it is. And we said, we want everybody to know that two women wrote this book. So we decided to make the cover bright fuchsia. You can flag in aircraft with this thing. And that was pretty much the gig. That was the first book, and the first two books. The New York Times took our first book, which was the white book, and they did a huge article on us. If you want to look it up on New York Times, people, okay, it's New York Times, and it was the article is called "People Are Seeing UFOs Everywhere," and this book proves it. It was April 24th, April 25th, 2017. And the morning that hit the street, my phone started ringing at 10:30, at 9:30 in the morning, didn't stop till 10:30 at night. And the same thing was happening down at the offices of the newspaper. They were getting called by news directors and television producers all over the world. Okay, so the UFO topic, even though there were a lot of people who used to say, oh, there's nothing to it, a lot of people are interested. And the fact that we've had this recent release of stuff and things like this, it validated a lot of stuff. It really did. So I'm excited about it.
Oh, I'm excited that, we live in a world now where when we were growing up, like in the 80s, 90s, to say the word UFO, you would like have a stretcher with two guys in white coats coming with
Yeah.
jackets for you. And so you were like, no. And now we live in a world where if you say the word UFO, people are like, really? Or they want to
Yeah.
know more, or
Yeah.
they're like,
Yeah. Tell me
oh,
more.
well, I don't believe that, but they're not calling the hospital either on you to get you locked up. So,
Well, there was also a mystique, especially you would sometimes see it in the movies in the 80s, particularly. Okay. Well, did you see that? No, and you didn't either. You know,
yeah.
it was the flavor. You don't want anybody thinking you're a whack job, you know. And then when I started writing a newspaper column, initially we got a whole bunch of mail at the paper. You know, who is this whack job lady who's telling this stuff? You know, but gradually we built a good audience up. And if you girls, if you see me trying to keep covering my bra, is I've lost about 70 pounds in the past year, and so it was for health reasons. Okay. And I lost about 70 pounds, and some of my clothes are a little loose, okay, which is a nice problem to have. Okay, I've got a completely new wardrobe. Would you like some UFO numbers?
I would. And I'll also say your outfit looks really nice, actually.
Thank you, thank you. Okay, and I can say this. Since I didn't grow up a gal, okay, I changed in my late 30s. Okay, after two stints in the military. Okay, uh, 2 years in the Air Force, served in Vietnam, combat soldier. Later, I served in nuclear submarines. Okay, and I did intelligence work on nuclear submarines. Okay, and I did that for about 9 years. Okay, and then I got recruited into stuff in the government, and that's what I did for the the proverbial 30-year career in D.C. You know, it's not as exciting as you think, trust me. But okay, here's the deal. People say, well, how many UFOs are there? Okay, well, if you I took the two national databases, National UFO Reporting Center and MUFON's database. They were very kind and they let me get their numbers from them. And I got the databases. They didn't talk to each other. You software people will understand that. And we had to go through a lot of trouble to get both databases to work with each other. We did it. Okay, so I'm not going to do the 2001 to 2015 number. I'm going to give you 2001 to 2020, a 20-year sample, and that's all we ever set out to do. Okay? All right. For that 20 years, 2001 to 2020, there were 167,632 reported sightings in the United States. That's reported sightings, 167,632. Now, over 20 years, that amounts to about 8,300 a year. Over 240 months of 20 years, it amounts to about 700 a month in the United States. And for 1,040 weeks of that 20 years, it amounts to about 161 a week. And for the 7,305 days of 20 years, it was about an average of 23 things being seen and reported here in the United States. Okay, now that's the reported ones. One of the things we found out was we figured there are a lot of people who are out there saying, I don't want to be labeled a kook or a nut or a crackpot, and I'm not going to report what I just saw. I don't care how many of my dogs it took, that kind of thing,
Right.
So, and then in 2017, Fox News did a poll that said 16.78% of adult Americans in the United States say they've seen a UFO. Okay. And it was kind of skeptical, that kind of thing. A lot of people, but then about a year later, the Gallup people also did a poll, and they came back with the same number, that 16.78%. Okay, based on that 167,632 I just told you about, only 1 in 255 people report what they see. That's the difference. So, how many people say they saw one? 42,746,160 people say they've seen a UFO. Okay, so you take that number by 20 years, that's about 2 million a year. I'm rounding them off. It's about the 240 months of 20 years, that's about 178,000 a month. And if you look at it from a weekly standpoint, that's about 41,000 a week. And it comes down to about almost 600, about 585 a day for the past 20 years, for that 20-year period. And those numbers aren't that different now than they were back in 2001 to 2020. Okay. So those are the numbers, and numbers don't lie.
No, and I think another reason why people don't report it is we unfortunately live in a time where we don't trust like MUFON or the government. So it's like, who do you call? Nobody. You just keep it to yourself.
It's
And
like
are like,
Ghostbusters, who
or
are
you
going to
go on a
call, right?
podcast show and say, hey, I saw a UFO, and you out it that way. But yeah, it's like we unfortunately live in a world now where it's like we don't trust the higher ups anymore to tell what they know. Oh, if I call the government and say, hey, there's a UFO in the sky, am I going to be silenced or
No,
like
no, no, no,
gag
no.
ordered?
It didn't work that way, but
That's,
they blew you off. The Air Force
yeah,
would say, we haven't been doing this for years, okay? And they would blow you off.
yeah.
Although some
So,
people at the Air Force would refer you to the National UFO Reporting Center. Those guys are very straightforward and very honest, and their numbers come up rather regular. They update their database every 2 weeks, so you're always getting 2 weeks worth of new numbers. Okay, very good people there.
well, it's good to know that there's good people doing it, because a lot of times you always hear like, oh, my information got pushed to the side and just ignored. And it's like, well, why even bother then? If they're not really going to take it serious, why call it in? So it's good to know that there actually is parts of the agencies that are seriously doing the work and not just, like you said, writing people off and just saying, yeah, we'll look into it. And then they're like, yeah, we'll put that in the like so-called Santa Claus pile in the post office that just sits there and collects dust.
Well, sometimes one of these analysts, they'll get the information, and I've talked to a few field investigators. We've talked about this issue, okay? and I'd be at one of their conventions, and we'd talk about it and say, hey, there's stories that some of you guys that are the representative for your state or something like that. You just, there's a Navy term, gun decking. You blew everybody off, and they've purged their field investigator ranks of people who do that, for one. But sometimes, you look up the thing, and if the thing was really pretty much around an airport or something like this, there was a tendency to kind of blow it off and say, "Hey, they just saw the landing lights of that plane," that type of thing. So there was a lot of room for bad interpretation by both the observer, but also bad interpretation by the analyst. And as a professional analyst, I was not very happy with hearing that, but we did the best we could with the data that was available. Okay, and I think it's going to be better because now the government's owning up to this. I got a funny feeling at some point there's going to be a national reporting service within the government. Okay, if they keep being with the disclosure aspects, because I truly believe now that the agencies within the government have been told this stuff is real. Okay, now I'm going to make a funny point. For the people who have seen that documentary, it came out a couple of months ago, The Age of Disclosure. It had Rubio, it had Senator Rubio, former Senator Rubio, he's now Secretary of State. It had Senator Gillibrand, it had Schumer, and it had Congressman Burkhart from down in Tennessee. All four of those people have copies of my books. We sent them the books, and suddenly, after they got these books, suddenly we were initially blown off. This is back in around 2017 or so. We were initially blown off, but suddenly there was more. They started taking serious interest, especially as some of these pilots started coming forward. Okay, when they actually started doing the congressional hearings, okay, with all those really cool pilots that saw all this stuff, I got a polite letter from Senator Schumer thanking me for advocating for it in my newspaper column. About every 6 months, I would say, why isn't the New York State congressional delegation demanding congressional hearings? If one person does it, he's nuts. But if all of you do it, you got coverage, And that was my argument. And the newspaper was cool about it, At one point, I took my numbers that I had, and we did it by congressional district, and we did a chart. The art department got together and printed it in the newspaper with all the congressional districts in New York State and what their UFO sightings were. Oh, God, the hate mail we got. It was great. So the boss said, do it again when you're done with the database. And when we mixed the MUFON numbers and we did it with MUFORC, when we pushed in the MUFON's new numbers, right, at that point, when we were developing the bigger book, oh, boy, we did, the art department got in there again and did another chart with all that stuff, and the hate mail was amazing. It was great stuff. Remember, we're journalists. We like to know we hit a nerve.
Right. And I feel like a motive with, we talk about, like how validating stuff is. And it's like, I feel like investigative journalists are like, if I don't get hate mail, I haven't done my job.
I'm going to move my microphone a little bit. Some of the listeners are saying it gets scratchy if I get loud. I apologize. Okay, I've moved it a couple of inches away. My computer blew up a couple of weeks ago, and this is a brand new computer, and I'm still kind of getting used to this machine, and I've been having a hard time getting the microphone volume correct. So just kind of, I'll try. Okay.
Oh, you gotta love tech. Everybody says, "Oh, it's plug and play," and you plug it and it doesn't play, and it's like,
Thank you. Well, the new laptops, they don't have a place to plug it in. Like you can't plug in a direct wire right to my router. Now it's all Wi-Fi. And so I don't want to get into computer tech because I have some horror stories and I'll probably use very foul language and I don't want to.
Oh, so do I. But before I jump to the next topic, I want to take a moment and just say from my heart and the heart of my show to you, thank you for your service and your sacrifice.
Thank
My
you.
dad was in the Navy, so I respect and I like to say thank you to veterans, especially like you saying, being in Vietnam. It like strikes a nerve for me that I didn't serve, but it strikes a nerve in me the way the country welcomed you back. I was like, that
They
was so
didn't.
wrong
They either
to
spit
me.
on us or called us names in airports.
Yeah,
It was horrible.
and
You know what's funny? It's funny. I wear a Vietnam veteran hat out when I'm out shopping or something like that, right? Not so much to show it off as much as it's how other vets see it and they can relate. Okay. I was in the post office the other day and several of the I was getting a package sent out, and several of the post office clerks came out and shook my hand. Apparently, since we got a little war going on over in Iran right now, it made them very sober up and said, "Oh my God, these vets here weren't even talked about." So yeah, yeah. Thank
yeah,
you.
and so the topic I'm wanting to jump to is one that we were talking about. I like to say in full transparency to everyone watching before we got started is you are versed in mysticism, witchcraft, and paganism.
Hmm.
And I've talked about them kind of individually or maybe a pair of on the shows, but never all three. And so I think if you could kind of go through each one and state, this is in your opinion, in your background, this is how it's different from this one. This is how they're similar because I think people don't really understand that. And I think if they did, they would have a different viewpoint. Do we
Okay.
have time to do that?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I give you the Reader's Digest version of that. Okay. First thing, let's look at paganism. Okay. You've got multiple faiths that are of ancient traditions. Okay. Now that doesn't mean you can't be a witch. Okay. A lot of people think you have to be a specific
Wicca.
set of gods and goddesses, right? I'm an Egyptian priestess. Okay, so I invoke the Egyptian gods. Okay, and I didn't choose that. Amazingly enough, I did not choose that. I had been practicing probably 10 years, and I was teaching a class at one of these downtown free university kind of places, right? And I was teaching an introductory class just to kind of drum up uh, people who might be interested in you do a temporary class for one evening, a crash course kind of thing, and people would sign up for a longer term with you. Okay, and one night I was doing and asked them, "Would you like a circle?" And we said, "Sure." So I had the stuff there for an altar, and I had it set up, and I said, "Okay." And I went to go and invoke the goddess, and I always just used the ones that were in my books, and most of them were Greek. And all of a sudden, the word ISIS slipped off my lips. And where did that come from? And then the next time I was out doing a wedding out in the park type of thing, and I went to invoke, and ISIS came off my lips again. I said, "Whoa, something's going on here." And I went and talked to a couple of senior priestesses. I said, "This is happening to other people." He said, "Somebody's hitting me up the side of the head, hon." So I got deeper into Egyptian mythology, and that works for me. And so my attitude is I've been a witch since 1977. Okay, okay, I was initiated on a nuclear submarine in the forward diesel. Okay,
Wow.
Yeah, we were on a classified mission, so I can't tell you where we were, but there were about 8 of us on the ship. And back in those days, being Wiccan or pagan, was almost a court-martial offense in the Navy in those days. It wasn't until like the 70s that bases start saying, "Hey, the pagans can have open ceremony. We have freedom of religion in this country." But it took to like the 1970s for that to happen. But the bottom line is, what we did actually a little bit later than that. It was more like coming up into the 80s and 90s. So a lot of Wiccans pretty much go with either the Gardnerian tradition or the Alexandrian tradition. They're pretty close to the same, just some variances, and they usually invoke the Greek goddesses, Artemis and Hera and things like that. Okay, or just say goddess. Okay. And I usually just go goddess, but I do invoke Isis. If it's my circle to do it, I invoke Isis. There are several other gods that I'm really tight with, as they say. And it was a profound experience. So that's the difference. Paganism, you can be celebrating with the Norse gods. Okay, and hey, hell for Thor, I mean, I'm good with those guys, I every now and then I wear Thor's hammer around my neck. I got one of those necklaces. Okay, I'm an equal opportunity priestess here. So that's kind of how that works. And then the bottom line is, there's people who just do the ceremonies and celebrate the holidays and things like this. And then there's also the mystical aspects of the magical aspect. And not everybody who's a pagan practices the mystical aspects. And it's not about, too many people, the movies make you think it's all about lighting candles and everything. And it's not. It's about quieting yourself. It's about being introspective. A little bit of meditation. Some people only meditate like they'll light a candle and they'll focus on the candle. It's the same thing as if somebody gives you a crystal ball, you use the crystal ball as a focal point. Okay. So I had been a witch for 22 years. One day, this is 1997, and I went to a Buddhist temple with a friend of mine, another witch. Okay, we wanted to hear this Lama who came to town to talk. So we got all done listening to him. 500 people, they all take their cars and they drive away and like that. And about 100 people stayed behind and lined the driveways in the parking lot. And we were told he'd come out and do a reception line with us. So fine. He gets to me, this little Tibetan monk, and he's on a full Lama. And he's walking along, 5 foot nothing, little short guy. He comes along, shaking hands. Hi, how are you? Hi, how are you? And he shakes hands with me, and suddenly he goes into a European handshake with both hands, gets right up in my face and said, "I know you." I said, "Holiness, I've not met you in this life." And he said, "Oh no, 2, 3, 4 times, past 400 years, I've worked with you before." And he shook hands with my witch pal. And he goes, he looks back at his entourage and monks. He says, "These two, they hang out together lifetime after lifetime. Good to see you again." And he paddles off. His lead monk comes over to him and says, "Look, I've been with him 15 years. He plays it close to his chest. I would go talk to him. He's going to have audiences on Saturday morning." So I came over there. You have to understand, at the time I was working at Lockheed Martin, and I got called into work. So I was just decked out, big makeup. I'm this lady of the 90s, big hair, big makeup, big nails, big heels. My nickname at work was Napoleon in heels. And so we got in there, and he looks at me and says, "So, what were you raised?" It's supposed to be a 15-minute appointment. I says, "What do you mean?" He says, "What religion? What were you raised here in the West?" I said, "I was raised Roman Catholic." "Oh, still Roman Catholic?" I said, "No, I've been running with the Wiccan shamans for the last 20 years." "Oh, still doing the yogi stuff, huh?" I said, "I've done this." He says, are you good at it? And I said, yeah, real good at it. You think you learned it all in one lifetime? And that turned into a 90-minute appointment. His monks who were running the thing had these 15-minute appointments all booked, were going crazy because we were out there just chewing the fat for 90 minutes. And about 2 months later, my gal buddy and I were both called in, and turned out we had been Tibetan sorceresses in several previous lives, had lived in monasteries both as men and as women, in different lifetimes, right? And that was the deal. And again, as a Westerner, I kind of had a kind of a loose New Age view on reincarnation. Yeah, okay, Westerners only don't get it, but yeah, maybe there's something to it, right? Well, it was handed to me on a platter, and I still had a tough time with it. And so at one point, I went to him and I said, can I take temporary vows and be like a temporary Buddhist nun for a time? He said, sure. He said, I'll give you the authorization, and I'll talk to the local lama and let her give you the approval. I said, fine. She said, you'll have to get a haircut and all that. And I said, yeah, all right. You know, and I'd been changed about 6 years, so giving up the hair and makeup and everything was like, I don't know. But okay, fine. So I got the haircut. The local lama said, sure, go ahead. Go up to the monk house and they'll give you a couple sets of robes. I said, fine. And I'd already cleared it over at work because, thank God we had DEI policies, so you could come in. We had a couple of Arab women with their faces covered in things, so this was not going to be much of a shift to that. So I went over to the monk house, and the monk says to me, I'm not giving you robes. I think you're confused. You don't know what gender you are. I said, I know exactly what gender I am. You don't know what I am. Okay. Now he wouldn't give me robes. So I'm an old theater person from way back. So I'm a seamstress. My grandmother taught me how to sew when I was 7. So I went home and I made a set. First time I worked at a temple. The other monks and nuns are looking, oh, you did it wrong. Oh, that's substandard. Oh, we don't wear it like that. That's wrong. And the big lama comes to town a couple of months later. I didn't stop learning. It's all new robes I had. So he comes to town, and a bunch of them go over and paddle. Now let me say, that sounds cool, okay, that they did this. No. Remember one thing about Buddhist view. Everybody is still a student, even the Dalai Lama. Okay, everybody's still a student. We're all at different levels. Okay, so his aide calls up. Would you have Tashi come over? That was my Buddhist name. And so I went over and I walked in. He's making tea for the two of us, and he looks at me. Stay by the door. So he's looking across from the kitchen to the living room door, and he's looking at me. And he says, "Turn around slow." So I turned around slow. And he says, turn around again, really slow. So I did it again. And he looked at me and says, you're still having trouble with this rebirth and reincarnation stuff, aren't you? I said, yeah, I am. I'm a Western. I was trained this way. I mean, I don't have any proof. He says, so you made these robes? And he said, yeah. How'd you know how to make them? I said, it just seemed like the right way to make them. Why? He says, how'd you know how to make an early 19th century set of Tibetan robes? Okay. So, in fact, he told me continue to wear them. It'll be a lesson for everybody else. So thereafter, I made robes for people. I made them the way they wanted. I also made them the way I wanted. So that was the deal. So I ended up spending 7 years in monastic life, an ordained Buddhist nun. Okay, and when I got ordained, the monks didn't want me, and the nuns wouldn't let me come live with either of them. So Lama says, don't worry about it. He says, I want you to go out into the center, go out there back in the community where you live, and start a small Buddhist center. I said, I don't know how to do that. He says, yes, you do. Think really deep. You know how to do this. You've done it for you. You've done it for centuries. I'm going, and the thing is, it all worked. I know how to do it. So now, that was back in 97, 98 time frame. Okay? Okay, my Tibetan name, as what he told me I was, my last Tibetan name was Sanag Tempi, which means keeper of tantric secrets, basically sorceress. Okay, and there's in Orthodox Tibetan Buddhism, there's two lineages. There's your regular burgundy and red and yellow monks and nuns that shave their heads and they're celibate and all that stuff. But in old Tibet, when Tedmonson Baba, as a tantric teacher in India, came to Tibet 1,200 years ago, he went and taught the shamans in Tibet at the time. Okay, again, the pagans, right? And so in Tibetan Orthodox Buddhism, there's four great traditions in Tibet. The Dalai Lama's in the Reform tradition. Okay, we in the Orthodox tradition thinks he's a bit of a radical. No, he's a great guy. But the bottom line is four great traditions in this varying degrees of such. But the Orthodox tradition is what I was ordained in. And they have this lineage called Nakpon. Nakmas for women, Nakpas for men. Okay, and they wear burgundy and white. They're allowed to grow their hair. Okay, and that's what he ordained me and my friend. We're Nakpons, and we are technically, well, we practice Buddhism. We also practice Tibetan shamanism for all intents and purposes, and we're sorceresses. Okay, good ones. So that's the deal. So for a long time, I didn't sign my name that way. Okay, my name is Cheryl Costa, but if I'm doing anything to do with the lineage, I started signing it Sanag Tempe. Okay, and they taught me how to do it in Tibetan, which is weird. But the bottom line is, it's good. Now the deal is, the time I spent in the monastery deepened my skills, because I got quieter and quieter and quieter inside. And that helps you. That means you can focus your concentration and do better magic. Okay. And again, that made me an outcast with the monks and nuns at that temple. So finally, a bunch of Burmese monks took a liking to me, invited me to come live with them. So fine. So they owned a row of townhouses. That was the monastery. Okay, and in our townhouse there were three of us. There was a Burmese nun. There was the Burmese monk. Actually, he was the venerable. He was the head one, and there was me. And so it was a nice gig, because I did my job at Lockheed, and on weekends we would go chanting through the park. Sometimes we'd get asked to come over and bless somebody's house. Somebody just bought a house, and come over and bless a couple of babies or something. Every now and then we get asked to go and chase the ghosts out of a house. And I'm really good at that. And so that's what it was like being a Buddhist monastic. So I'm no longer, my vows are relaxed. I'm no longer functioning as a nun, so I grow my hair back. I dress very, very Western and very conventional for a professional now, but I'm technically functioning as a Nakma. Okay, so I'm a Tibetan sorceress, and when I represent Buddhism, I wear the burgundy and white robes. Okay, and that's the difference. But the thing is, my magic has grown because the time in the monastery, I got to quiet myself tremendously, and actually got to start being clear enough in my mind that I started touching past lives. And I've tested clearly about 5. And then there's probably upwards of about 20 altogether. I don't have names, okay, but I have knowledge from those eras. Previous life, I was an electrician on U550, died on 14 April 1944 off the coast of New York. Our submarine got ran by a destroyer. I died in Yokosuka, Japan. I lived in the Geisha district. I lived in Geisha. Okay, and I died of typhoid. Okay, and the last life I can remember in Tibet was the Sanag Tempe life. Okay, and then there's other ones beyond that. It's been a realization as a Westerner to realize that we are eternal beings, and these chicken suits are, that we live in, these suits of flesh that we live in, are for all you live action role players or cosplayers. This is just a cosplay outfit for flesh. Okay, that's not you. Who you are is deeper inside, looking out. Okay, you are
Exactly.
immortal. You are immortal.
And it's interesting, like you say, you don't have the names, and like the first thing that popped in my head is you don't need names, because I feel like you're pointing out the difference between Western and Eastern thought. Eastern thought is you have a past life. That's incredible knowledge to have.
We all have. We all have.
Western thought is, well, who were you? What's your name? It's like, why do in the West do we need that validation? But then at the same time, though, in the West, if I was to say, oh, I had a past life like Moses, people will drop the like and go, oh my God, you're Moses. And it's like, I didn't say I was Moses.
Yeah,
And
no, I get that.
people get hung up on, the names. And so I think it's really, a powerful get that, you have these three, maybe 20, but you don't have the names, and you're not seeking the names because
They're
that,
lost to history.
yeah,
No. When after they had identified me, different monks would come to town, and they would walk up to me and shake hands with me, even when I was in lay clothes, and say, "Sanag, so good to see you." They were seeing something different. They were looking past the presentation. They were aware of something. Okay, and these were highly trained monks, Tibetan monks.
right.
One,
I think they
one,
read the energy.
yeah, I think that's what it is. Now, let me give you another flavor on this that goes with this. Now, this has been, what, 20, 23 years, 28 years, something like that, since I met Milana, okay? And we correspond, and every time I publish some books, I have to mail them a couple of copies, whatever we're doing, right? And I hope you like spy novels, because I just done 2 spy novels that I wrote. So, but the deal was, when I was I was on this lecture circuit for a while, okay, about this kind of topic matter, and I finally ended up putting it to bed in the beginning of my thing, like beginning of my talk. I began to talk with, basically it started out, you probably want to know who I am. I can't give you a name other than the one I've got in my wallet. Okay, but I walked the Silk Road. I remember the pyramids when they were new. I have marched with Roman legions. I have died with Roman legions. I have marched with Spartans. I have been carried home dead on a shield. And just ran that list of those kinds of things I'm aware of. That's how deep back I have been. Okay. And it obviously goes deeper back, but we're talking the other line of it. I have been every manner of animal, a creepy thing that crawls on the earth. I have been predator and prey. Okay, I have died. I have been eaten. I have been stabbed. I have died of sickness. I have died of childbirth, bombs, bullets, spears, arrows, childbirth, childbirth, childbirth. Okay, these are the things I remember. And the last guy suffocated on the submarine when they sank. Okay, so the vocation, python. Okay, so you get the idea. It really opens up your perspective. And I know there's people out there saying, "God, I wish I could be there." Maybe you should just no, you don't. Okay, trust me, there's a lot to this. And I'm in the Veterans Administration 3 times a month with the shrinks. So, so just understand that. Now, the shrinks, why? I've got serious PTSD from combat, and I have serious PTSD from my time as a field officer, that's an intelligence officer in the field. Ask your questions, please.
No, it's I'm thinking about like you're saying writing spy novels or writing different topic books and like the UFOs. I can see now where the information comes from. And do you feel like with your military background and your mysticism type background, and by mysticism I mean the pagan witch and the
Yeah, the
monk
whole thing. Yeah, that's why
in the whole
I call myself a mystic these days because it covers all those camps.
right, but do you feel like those make this information more relatable to you and you experience more of it because you're so open, or do
Yeah,
you feel like you just feel it gives you more credibility to people because people are like, oh, I have military background, they're gonna automatically believe me about this
no,
over
no, no, no.
civilians?
I'm 74 years old. I think if I bring any gravitas to it, is that I've lived an extremely unique life. Okay, and that's the trick. I've lived this extremely rich life. A lot of strange stuff happened to me, and uh, and 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 as I look back at it now, um, yeah, I'm going to say it this way. God, this always happens. It's weird like that. It's weird like that. Um, I think the also part of it too is as I've learned to quiet myself. This isn't something you do in a month in a meditation class someplace. This was 7 years of hard work. Okay, doing this. Particularly when I was working with the Burmese monks, they really had a good handle on it. Okay, we had an interesting life, and we did not. We had a TV, but we didn't use it most of the time. Okay, because we didn't have cable. And I was a different tradition than them, a more conservative tradition. So they loved sitting down at dinner and we're sitting there eating rice and vegetables, and they are um, uh, we have what they call monastic debate and argue points of Buddhism and theory and that type of thing. And they loved arguing with me because I was always the conservative position. So it was a lot of fun. And every now and then I do get to go go do a retreat someplace, and I do the retreat. I get to have that same kind of monastic debate kind of thing. It's fun from that standpoint, but it's highly intellectual too. So as a Westerner, it's so awkward. But the point I'm making, because you clear yourself and you're open to it, all the knowledge of the universe is out there. Okay, and you can connect with it. You can connect and have parts of it. Now, can you look it up like a book? No. Can you Google it? No, you can't. But if you start thinking about something you're interested in, suddenly you start. I wouldn't say suddenly, but maybe over a period of time, you start understanding stuff. Okay, give me an example. When I was writing murder mysteries early in my writing career, um, I had a couple of medical examiners say, "Wow, for a writer, you really know a lot about forensics and the how an ME looks at things." Okay, I don't know where it came from. Okay, and eventually I had a real ME, Harvard trained ME. I would send her I would send her the draft, and she would check my work, and she'd actually type up a death certificate for the deceased. And so I had a real death certificate for that character. And so the knowledge comes to you a certain way, and it's a strange experience. It doesn't happen overnight. It took me years, but it is possible if you apply yourself. Uh, that's the whole paganism. Do I still go out on pagan holidays? Yeah, I do. Okay. Sometimes I go out by myself and have a ritual. Sometimes I'll go to somebody. I'll go to Pagan Pride Day and do something like that. Sometimes I used to teach. I taught my last class in 2023. Graduated the largest class I ever had in 2024. Okay, and we went to Pagan Pride Day. We signed up for Pagan Pride Day, and the class went down. And about a third of the class, we had them dressed in Egyptian god and goddess costumes. They all got together and made them. They had pictures and they made them. Okay, and what they did was we had the people who didn't dress walk around with them on their arm. Okay, and the gods and goddesses would walk around and they're role playing with people. Well, actually, they're actually channeling, but it seemed like role playing with people. And the gods and goddesses were shaking hands with people. It was one of the best things they ever had at Pagan Pride Day, you know. And so that's what I directed. And did the opening rituals with Egyptian rites, very accurate Egyptian rites that we were able to look up. So again, you have to look at it. It's not about getting something for yourself like the Westerners think of. Oh, I'll do a spell to bring something into my life. No, 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 no. No, this is about a self experience. It's about an experience for yourself, okay, and for others. So as a teacher, whenever I go to Pagan Pride Day, if I know I'm going to go, I always sign up to do a couple, 3 or 4 lectures. Always. You always should give something back. Okay. So that's
Right.
the deal. But the thing is, all the mysticisms are pretty close, have a lot of the same rules.
Right. And one thing also I feel like asking because of your veteran status is, your perspective of the vernacular of saying like UFO is now a UAP. Why do you think the government was like, we have to change the vernacular?
They were trying to get away from the UFO term because it had, as you said, as we started the program, it had that screwy connotation. Okay. Um, Linda and myself, when we were publishing our later books, we just said, we're not going to use UAP. We're going to use UFO. Okay. But to their defense, to the government's defense, and Lou Alessandro and I had a nice conversation over coffee about this. Okay. The phenomena is bigger than just some kind of craft. It's much bigger than that. There's a lot to the UAP topic matter that isn't just about technical hardware or technical phenomena. Okay, that's the thing people don't get. Some of this stuff is, I'm going to say it this way, some of this stuff is a mystical manifestation. Okay. Um, the people that are out there saying they're demons from space. I've been reaching out there for a long time, and I've talked to other monks who've been reaching out there for a long time, and we're not finding anything malevolent. Okay, and that's the honest truth.
No, I agree. And I feel like, uh, and I'm going to put this in generic terms. I'm not, going to label a specific organization or anything, but I feel like the government likes to, when a topic reaches a certain point, put some fear into people about it and kind of try to break it up. And so, like UFOs, no, it was harmless. And then all of a suddenly it's like we have, oh, UFOs are coming to invade and they're coming to attack us and they're going to, take over the world. And it's like, really, why is Hollywood now doing this? And I feel like it's so the UFO community dissolves and people are like, nope, we can't talk about UFOs.
They could have done it back in Babylonian times, it would have been a lot easier. Okay. They could have done it in 1561, April 1561, when the people of Nuremberg, Germany, came out of their houses and buildings and saw a Star Wars battle going on over the city. Okay. I mean, this stuff's been going. Somebody was protecting us. Somebody was playing. Some race up there was playing nanny and was protecting our fledgling race. Okay, and I've read all these kinds of stories, and somebody's been protecting us for a long time. And if you ever wanted to know about, okay, don't beat up the reptilians. Okay, everybody wants to beat up the reptilians. You see art on the internet, you know, and they're always muscle bound, looking like they haven't had a nice thing to eat in weeks, you know, that kind of thing. If you look up Babylonian artifacts, you will see reptilians feeding a baby off of her breasts. Okay, you will see that sort of thing. Okay, they have been with us since the garden. All right, and the people who are trying to beat up the reptilian races that are visited here. There's other races that have been here, but the reptilian races, they're trying to equate it back to the snake in the garden. Okay,
Right.
and from my book, I say it was one of the reptilians, and he's basically saying to Eve, you know, you're better than this. You shouldn't be in charge. Okay, that's the way I view this. That's from everything I have read, from everything I've talked about with other people that know about this topic matter. Okay, when they keep the congressman, Burkhart, a couple other people say, oh, people are really going to be scared when they're not like what we really know about them. You know? And I think that might be part of it. They might not realize that they have been kept a secret from us for millennia. Okay, that's the thing. And they're walking among us on the street. They're holding shoulder straps on the subway. They're riding next to you on the bus. Okay, there's a lot of them that are humanoid that have integrated into our culture, and you wouldn't know them from anybody else. That's that's the truth.
Right.
And
And
people don't want to hear that, you know.
well, I feel like, that's the interesting thing to me when it comes to people and their beliefs is, you'll believe Adam and Eve were the only people on the planet, and Cain and Abel married these mysterious women that appeared out of nowhere, and you're okay with that. But the fact that there could be an alien race walking amongst us that looks like us is totally off your spectrum. I'm like, how is that even possible? It's like I can't even fathom how that logic stream flows. And I had to finally say to myself one day and go, I'm so glad I'm only responsible for myself and my thoughts, because if I started trying to get responsible for others, I would be in a hospital locking myself in a padded room because I would go insane.
Yeah, yeah, that's what it works out to. There's always somebody, we'll say, in governments, not just our government, but you have to, poor Nick Pope, who just passed away recently, he knows all about this from the Ministry of Defense. You know, there are always people trying to cover this stuff up, you know. And um, I think they were all, including our government, was afraid it would lose its power.
Right.
Okay. Um, when this stuff started happening back in the 30s and in the 40s, the people in the military were deeply concerned. And then after things like Roswell and a couple of other things that happened at that time, where they actually had physical evidence and was way beyond anything we ever conceived, okay, as humans, the feeling was we don't have anything that can keep up with it, okay? So we've got to play this down, otherwise everybody think we can't protect them. The truth is they couldn't protect us anyway. Okay, I
Right.
mean, in Vietnam, the people who encountered UFOs in Vietnam would fire the missiles off the wings of the plane, and then the next day, somebody else would be flying, and the missiles, those same missiles, were shot back at us, from their ship, that type of thing. So it was crazy stuff. The term in Vietnam was enemy helicopters. The North Vietnamese did not have helicopters. Okay, so the term enemy helicopters was the term we used in Vietnam for something that was not anybody from our side. Okay,
And,
I did operations at one point for a time.
right. And there are certain things that, I agree, if people knew about, might, you know, go off on the deep end and, get into paranoid schizophrenia and, and we don't need that. And so, yeah, dumb it down. But part of me also looks at when they do the cover stories, they have gotten so bad at them. It's like you can look at the story, you go, this story doesn't make any sense. It has nothing to do with what this is.
Yeah,
How, do they expect this to work? And then I'm amazed that it does.
yeah. Folks, by the way, the commentaries in the chat room. I apologize to you about this microphone. It worked really great on the other computer. I don't know what's going on with this. Perhaps it got banged and it's not correct. I have a counterpart, but I can't dig it out. It took me 40 minutes to get it dug out and hooked up. So I do apologize if it's a bit on the muffled side. Somebody else told me this the other day in a teleconference, so I'll see what we can do about fixing it for the future. But thank you for telling me. I tried. I thought it was okay now.
And,
The
and
good,
also in the replay, it may be a lot better in the replay
it might
where,
be. It might be. I do a teleconference for one of my physicians with the VA, and she every now and then she's told me that this new setup, this machine's only a couple of weeks old. Okay, so I have no idea if this. I went in there today and did some setting adjustments to see if I could make it better, and so we'll see. I apologize. But
it's
the
all
bottom
about
line with all
talent.
of this stuff, the bottom line with all of this stuff is that they kept secrets from us. Okay, basically pat us on the head. Don't worry, we got everything under control. And there was it came out in that movie. The Age of Disclosure. There defined when the CIA was set up in the late 1940s. A part of it, they had a division, and which is now referred to as the Legacy Division, whose job it was to completely debunk this stuff and to keep it under wraps. Okay, and even Congress couldn't touch it. Okay, and that's when Congress started getting concerned when they were told their clearance wasn't high enough, and they said, "I got the highest one we have in the government." Oh no, you don't. And so this is what's coming out, that even our government had been lied to. And I know people in government now that are saying, "Wait a minute! Now they're coming out with all this stuff." I got I got a couple of these people calling me up, customer people in the government calling me up and say, "Hey, we'd like to know more about this. Can you hook us up with somebody who you guys aren't all nuts and kooks and crackpots that we thought, can we talk to you about some stuff?" So a lot of people in the UFO community that have been prominent are being tagged right now and asked can by other agencies, not necessarily the military. Now, let me qualify something about the military and like the CIA and all of this stuff. Writing the spy book, I had a lot of questions about this. Okay, the the CIA does intelligence work for the seat of government, the president, Congress. Okay, and I suppose the Supreme Court, if they ask a question, the CIA, that's what their job is. There's another agency that does it for the war fighters, the military war fighters, okay, and that's called the Defense Intelligence Agency, okay, DIA. And the DIA sometimes networks with the CIA, okay. And so that's kind of where my experience is coming from. I can't go further into it than that.
No, I understand that. And I also, I find it interesting that the way that they bring it out and they bring out the information, it always seems like it's the magician's illusion act. We're
Yeah,
going to talk about UFOs, so you're looking over here, while we're going to sneak around and do something over here so you don't see that. And we're going to give you just enough that you're enticed, and we don't have to really expose a lot and say a lot. And then later we're like, well, now that this over here is getting exposed, we're going to go back over to here. And it's like, well, you know, so do you feel that that's an accurate assessment that a lot of when the government comes forward and says we're going to disclose this, it's not necessarily really for the benefit of the people, it's a distraction to keep you from looking at something else they're doing?
I think I'm going to try something with the microphone closer to me. I hope that works better. You guys in the chat room need to tell me, okay? I'm going to talk directly into the microphone. And he's questioning whether or not if I'm being messed with. Maybe, maybe.
Yeah.
Okay, I wouldn't put it past people. Um, I got banned from a lot of shows, and I think there was some outside pressure to ban me from some shows. Okay, so because I was being very square with people, and so that might be part of it too. But the bottom line is that's part of the intelligence game. Sometimes it's about distraction. Sometimes it's about distraction. Sometimes it's about misinformation. Okay, and misinformation is a big part of the intelligence business. Okay, so I clearly understand that. So like I said, we don't know the whole scope of it. Hopefully, we'll get a lot more. They're releasing some pretty good material. I was impressed with that Apollo 17 footage where we saw a triangle going across the sky. I saw one of them back in 2012. Okay, a triangle with three lights on it, and it kind of looked like a Star Wars fighter on the back of it. I saw one of those things, and 8 months later, I'm doing a newspaper column. Okay, so honest to God, that was becoming a newspaper columnist about UFOs was not on my schedule. But after I saw that triangle, I was going, "Whoa, this is real," So and I've had a lot of people trying to debunk it. Oh, it must have been a triangular shaped blimp, is what they told me. Okay, and I've heard every debunk going. So, can I say?
What's your opinion too of NASA? Because a lot of people view NASA as not really doing anything with all the billions of dollars that they have. Because let's be honest, when was the last time NASA sent, something into space, like people, and we went exploring somewhere? It's like that all seems to have stopped, and we're focused more here and
No, I think they're
other
doing. I
agencies.
think they're doing a lot of stuff, but the press isn't covering it like they used to. Okay, we hardly ever hear about launches of things, and then we find out, oh, I think they've got this new probe just reached Jupiter or something like that. I never heard about that being launched, that kind of thing. Okay, so I think we're being just not told, or the press just said people think people don't want to know about it, so they're not reporting it.
Right. Well, because, yeah, and the other part I was going with it is like you have SpaceX, and they're like, we're going to Mars, and everyone's like, oh, we're finally going into space, and we're going to explore, and we have material we can bring back and reuse. And I'm like, NASA's been doing this a lot longer. How did they not figure out how to use reusable equipment?
They could have. They could have. Thing was, the military was heavily involved, and if you think about how government works, well, they had a lot of really smart people working on this stuff. There was no motivation to do make the technology reusable. Okay, the original plan for the Apollo project was simply we got to keep up with those Ruskies. That was the mentality. Okay, we've got to. They put a guy up in space. They put Gagarin up in space. Okay, we've got to do that. We got to get somebody up there. Oh, they might make it to the moon. We got to get there first. The idea was, they get to the moon. If they militarize it, they'll be dropping rocks on us like kids throwing stones off a highway overpass. So that was part of it. That was the big deal. They were frightened the Soviets were going to get there first, and they took the cheapest route. In fact, what really broke my heart was when Nixon's Republican administration came in, and they canceled a whole bunch of Apollo flights to the moon. Okay, and we had the technology then. They're talking about putting a base up there now. We had the technology in the 60s to do it, but they blew it off. Okay, and we got to save it, for something for home. Okay, and we beat the Russians, and that was the objective. That was the problem. And this is the point you have to kind of keep in mind. We didn't trust them; they didn't trust us. Okay, and what it amounted to is our leadership in both countries. The leadership in both countries bankrupted both countries, trying to be better than the other side. Okay,
Right.
that's the stupid thing.
Right. Because
I
I
can
always
say that in
thought,
Russian. Da tоварищ. Yes, comrades. Yes.
yeah, because that was always like one of my favorite lines in Independence Day when they're on Air Force One and he's like, how do we, not, how do we have this and this? And the guy's dad looks at him and goes, do you really think they spent $10,000 on a toilet seat? I'm like, yeah, and it's
Six
like
hundred
we
dollar
think about
hammers.
this and we're like, that's exactly right. Our government is spending all this money and we have no idea where it's going. We're told it's for this, and we're like, the price tag doesn't match. But we're like, okay, keep us safe.'re good.
Well, we're talking about, we didn't hear about them launching things. We've put some stuff up around Mars the last few years that is amazing stuff. And they're getting really, really, really great pictures. I'm going, I never heard about that launch. you
Yeah,
know, so this there's a lot of people that have not been telling the public, or it hasn't been reported to the public, like again, the media. The media has gotten very cheap about what they report. They worry about you and I were talking before we came on the air about numbers. Okay, so the news has to generate numbers, or we're not going to cover it.
right.
That's what it
And
boils down to. I was a talk show host for half a dozen people over the years, part time. I had my day job, and I got to be a talk show host on the weekends. And there was one point in my career I was making industrial movies, and it was so funny what people don't know. So
right. And I kind of got disillusioned with the media in the late 80s and then the 90s. And the late 80s was we had an anchor woman come in and was talking to us about the news and what it's like. And she was in Kuwait when the oil fires were going. And so she was telling us her experience. And she said, now, the saddest thing about news now is all those stories of like humanity at its best, you'll never hear anymore because they don't bring in the ratings.
yep,
all the news has to bring in ratings. And I thought, okay, yeah, that makes sense, but
If it bleeds, it
ratings
leads.
determines.
That was the old motto. If it bleeds, it leads.
Right. And then in the 90s, when, I would go to the airport and I would see the soldiers, they're getting ready to be shipped out, and they're all laughing and cutting up. And I'm like, on the news, they show it's horrible over there. And these people look like they're getting ready to go to a party. I'm like, what is going on? And so I sat down next to one and I'm like, I need to ask you, can I ask you a question? He's like, absolutely. I go, how do you do it? And he goes, do what? I go, how do you every day know there's going to be a bomb on the road or something, and this is going to happen because that's what they show us on the news? And he goes, I'll be honest with you, I've been watching the news since I've been here, and I don't understand it either because we'll have one IED a month if we're lucky.
Okay.
And I'm like, what? Oh, that's it. I was like, after that day, I was like, I'd never watch the news again because I was like, no.
Okay. I was in Cam Bay, Vietnam. And it's a port. It's a port. And it was an Air Force base there, and almost one of the biggest air bases at that time. And one of the things that came out one day, towards the war, we were winding down. Okay, President Nixon put in a place called Project Hammer Draw. We're going to get more soldiers out of there, and they were just shipping people home left and right. Okay, we had a couple of rockets come in and hit a couple of our buildings. Okay, at the base, it was reported in the news that nothing was hurt on the base. They hit a chicken coop. We didn't have a chicken coop on the base, but that's how they reported it. Okay. And I went back, when I got back to the States, I went back and researched certain things, you know, and I just, my God, that isn't reality what really happened.
Yeah.
So
And
the news is twisted. And sometimes you make, I don't know if it's being done by the news agency itself or the government or both.
well, that, and then I look at, in Vietnam's, obviously I'm too young to know it personally, but I watch like a movie like, say, Good Morning Vietnam, where he starts, broadcasting actual facts over the airwaves, and they're like, we got to shut him up. We got to stop him. He's not supposed to be talking about that.
Yeah.
And I can't help wondering, one, if that really, if that would really ever happen, would somebody really break rank and spill something they're not supposed to? But secondly, I would think in my mind, morale would be better if you knew the truth and you knew what's going, because you'd be better prepared for it versus being told, oh, it's a sunny day out. And you're like looking out the window and going, this is far from sunny. I was lied to. And,
The, the
it's
guy
like,
in the guy in Vietnam, Robin Williams played Adrian Cronauer. Okay, I met the guy. He was an attorney in Washington D.C. and he was in a media attorney. So I got to talk to him at one point. I considered hiring him as an attorney for me when I was becoming a talk show host. Okay, but I asked him something about that just in passing, and he says it's never the straight story. And he says, and you're the person there, and someone's telling you what you're supposed to say. So that's all I can say. You know?
yeah. And so, yeah. And so it's just, it's interesting to me when we look at the world and we go, oh, this is all new. The fact of this going on is all new, and we're, seeing it, unfold and everything, and realize this has been going on a lot longer than we realize. And some people go, oh, it's been actually going on since the 30s, or the 1800s, 1700s. It's like, how, masterful these people have become in covering things up. But then it's like, I look at it and I'm like, if this has been going on since, let's say, 1600s, people covering stuff up and shaping what you hear. How now is it unraveling? Because I would think they've perfected it and they have workarounds for everything to keep it going because they've been doing it for centuries. Why now doesn't it work?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Nobody wants to give you the straight story, okay? And that's all I can say. They don't want you to know the straight story. It depends upon what it is. Oh, you'll hear their story clear, loud and clear, but you won't hear the straight story. And it's depressing. It's depressing. I had back in the 80s, I had a situation where they wanted to take my security clearance away from me, and I had a very high one at that time. And they said, "Well, we know you're going through this gender change." I said, "Yeah, so what?" And they said, I'm good. I'm good. And they said, "Well, we think you can be blackmailed." This was the old trope they used to do with the gay people. So we think you can be blackmailed. Heck, they passed a law back during President Wilson's era about that. Okay, and so the bottom line was, the guy told me we're going to turn the clearance off. I said, "Wait a minute, what if I could fix that?" And at that time I was still presenting as my boy stuff, but I was getting really soft around the edges, if you know what I'm saying. So I said to him, I said, "What if I could fix it?" He said, "I doubt you could." I said, "Can you give me 3 weeks?" And he says, "Yeah, I'll be back in 3 weeks. I'll turn the clearance off then." I said, "Fine." I came back 3 weeks later. I threw a VHS tape on the desk. I said, "I'm the blonde on Phil Donahue. I'm the redhead on Gary Collins." And his jaw went down like that. "You came out on national television?" I said, "Yeah." I said, I'm booked with 4 other shows, And I made copies here at work. I made copies at home, and I passed them out to all the guys who were working. They took them home and watched them with their wives. So 3 days later, I get a letter on Department of Defense stationery. "While you have demonstrated that you can't be blackmailed, we are questioning your good judgment. We want you to talk to a Department of Defense certified psychiatrist. Refuse and we'll turn the clearance off right now." I said, "Oh, happy to talk to him." I'd had a full set of psychologicals done at Hopkins. Okay. I knew what I was. They were up there. They got done with the test and said, "Hey, kid, you got a girl's brain." No kidding. So the deal is, I said, "Sure." I said, "Just send me to someone who knows what transgenderism is, sex and gender, because not every psychiatrist really has a handle on it." And they said, "Fine." So they sent me up to some people. And the guy talked to me for 25, 30 minutes. He said, "I'm going to have to run a full set of psychologicals to back me up." But he sits back, and people would smoke in the office in those days, right? So he lights up the cigarette and he's sitting there and he's looking at me and he says, "Cheryl, you're saner than the people who sent you here." Okay. And it came back. They actually adjudicated my clearance. I got it actually raised after this. Okay. So, but that forced me to go, that actually made me, turn me into an activist, because suddenly I was completely out. I'd been on national television. I was on national talk shows. I was on radio talk shows. And I became a trans activist. And because they made me come out of the closet, I didn't have to protect anything. So, hey, let it all hang out, baby. So that's how this went down. In fact, back in the early 80s, the term transgender wasn't on the books. It was people were transsexuals, or they were drag queens, or they were cross dressers. Those are diagnostic terms. okay? And there was a group of us that formed a group called the International Foundation for Gender Education. It sounds like a big brick building someplace, so it's 12 people around a big table. And so we decided to go out there and use a non-diagnostic term when we were being interviewed. So instead of having these talk show hosts dropping new medical terms, we gave them one they never heard of, transgender. It was that informal term doctors used in the office. Okay? So, fine. So there were 6 of us that started doing talk shows. We talked to the editors of newspapers for like the Sunday magazines and things like this. And the effort was, if we do lots of interviews over a period of about 6 to 8 years, those interviews being published will show usage of the term and it will get in the dictionary. So I'm one of the 6 to 12 people who got the word transgender in the dictionary. Okay? And now if I go ahead and type the word transsexual in a piece of my writing prose, the AI software that checks my grammar and things tells me that's an antiquated term and I should use transgender. Okay? It's strange. But that's the deal. That's the deal. This is how this works. That's why I'm not afraid to come out here and talk about this stuff, because I'm very open. I have to be to protect myself. So that's it.
No, I understand. And so we have about like 3 minutes left.
Okay.
And is there anything you have coming up that you want to promote, or any projects that you want people to be aware of, or share where to get your books?
If you'd like a psychological thriller, this is the one to get. It's called the Impossible Gal. It won't have that line across. This is a proof copy, okay? But it's called the Impossible Gal, and it's a psychological thriller, because I tell the story from the perspective of the intelligence work that was being done by the intelligence officer, but I also tell it to you from behind her eyes, because it was a transsexual spy. It was a translator, okay? And I tell it to you from behind her eyes. And the shrink right now, it's the reading club, book club book for the Veterans Administration shrinks, because I did such a great job of writing a psychological thriller. But the deal is, the spy side of it is the declassified story, and the other part of it of what's going on in her head and how she sees things and how she interprets things. It's a good book. Now, that's one. The other book, both of these, by the way, were assigned to me by the hang on, I just lost my earphone. Both of these books were written as cathartic treatment. So the first book I wrote was called The Second Oldest Profession. And I wrote a series of short stories about this particular character who's a undercover spy, and she's trans. Okay, and at that time there were 3 trans undercover field officers. That's history you don't hear about. Okay, so this book was the first book. I wrote this back in 2023, published it in 2024, and it covers the 1990s. Okay. So many people wrote me and say, we want to know about her first mission. So I wrote this, The Impossible Gal. Both are available on Amazon. And if you want to buy them, this is the one to buy first. Read this one first, and then read this one. Okay. But people have, the fans have asked me to write book 3. Now, what book 3 does, picks up where the second book, where the Impossible Gal leaves off, and there's a 4-year gap in there before the other stories that were in the red book happened. And also there were these short stories, there were big gaps of years in between all those stories in that first book. I fill in the gap, go from that first mission to the 1990s, and then fill in all the holes in between. Remember, the Soviet Union was coming apart at the seams. and the communists were on their way out. Those of us in the intelligence business knew in 81 they're nearly bankrupt. They'll be out of business within 10 to 15 years, and they were out of business in 91, 92.
Right, and the fall of the wall, it was like, people forget about that, and it's like, yeah, history has these little nuanced moments where we look at the event and go, yeah, this is, history in the making, but nobody thinks about all the stuff that went into making or pushing that event to happen. And so it's like, yeah, like you're saying, there's a lot of people behind the scenes doing things in different roles and different ways, and they're all untold stories. And we had, like Hogan's Heroes, the TV show. It's a farcical tale, but they had the term in there that they used for Hogan's team, unsung hero. And I was like, that is so poignant because so many people were working behind the scenes on things
Yes,
that
yes,
never
yes,
get
yes,
credit.
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
And so it's like, yeah, there's lots of unsung heroes out there in the world.
Yeah, there are. And in the intelligence community, I made the comment in the opening for the book that there's all these women that serve, genuine women that served in the intelligence business, and most of us will never ever hear their name. We won't know their names. Okay, in
Right.
fact, most spies, if everything was done right, you have never heard of them, and you are not supposed to hear of them. And in fact, when their name might be declassified to talk about them after 50 years, usually at that point they're dead. Okay, so that's why it happens like this. That's why you see these British spy movies that sometimes come out and they say, this is based on a true story, because the guy's dead now. Okay,
Right.
so that's how it has to be, because if people heard your name, like say at the end of the war or something like this, and people might say, "Oh, that guy did that, or that gal did that. Oh, I'm going to go kill his family." That kind of thing. That's what they're trying to protect.
Right.
The intelligence business, especially in the field, is a slimy profession. Trust me.
Well, that, and there was all these different societal rules that were in place. Like, you look at the movie Hidden, I think it's called Hidden Figures, which was the women who pretty much ran NASA
Yeah.
and kept it afloat during the 60s, but never got credit for anything. And it's like, yeah, it's amazing to hear these stories and then be like, well, we look at it in today's terms and go, why couldn't we know this then? Like,
Well, okay.
that women were working
It's
in NASA.
sexism. It's
Yeah.
sexism. Okay. A lot of things that were discovered in astronomy, late 19th century and early 20th century, were discovered by women that were doing the work in the back room. They used to call them the computers. Okay. And all these white men took credit for the things that these women discovered. Okay, and there's a long history of this stuff. So this is the misogyny is what the people, women, to some degree, trans women are fighting. Is that stop trying to hide us?
Right. And so I just want to say, as we wrap up this episode, I just want to say thank you for sharing your story and your experiences with us. And I am hopeful that the sound may be better in the replay, because sometimes some of the glitches may get ironed out in the recordings that they do somehow on technology. I don't know how it works, but
Yeah.
I've seen it and
I
experienced
have
it.
one
But
question. I have a question. Can you hear me clearly?
I can hear you clearly. Every once in a while, it's like I'll hear like it sounds like your mouth is right against the mic, and it's creating like a little
Yeah. Okay.
verb. But normally, no, it was like I
Okay.
didn't
It
have
may come out okay on the recording. We'll see what happens. If you can hear me clearly, okay. I just don't know what they're not hearing. So, but
well, and it could
it's
be
good
their
to be on
speakers.
the show. It really has, Mike. I appreciate you having me on.
Yes, and one thing I will say to you, and I mean this as I mentioned with my dad being a veteran, I'm going to take it a step further and say, from the heart of my show and me, thank you for what you're doing for humanity.
Thank you. My pleasure. My pleasure.
And to everyone who is watching this episode, please follow along and buy her books and, you know, look into her story and everything, and like, follow, and subscribe, because you never know when we may have her back on and share more. And hopefully the mics will be all worked out and all the kinks worked out. But when you get new stuff, you can't always iron out everything up front. So do keep that in mind. And thank you, everyone. And thank you so much, Cheryl, for having the courage to step forward and to share your experiences, and to share it in a way that you're not putting it front and center and saying that, like some people do. It's more of a, hey, this is my life, this is my story. So thank you for that.
Thank you. Thank you. I will say in Russian, Спасибо. До свидания.
I'm not even going to attempt that. I was going to, but then I was like, nope, I could feel my mouth not going the right way. And I was like, nope, I'm not even going to try to butcher
Hasta
that.
la vista. We'll do it in Spanish. How's that?
There you go. Hasta la vista. Or hasta luego.
Bye bye.
All right. Bye bye, everyone.